Welcome to the Edelheit Experience, a compelling conversation about revolutionizing health and well-being, bringing you rich stories and lessons learned from leading corporate executives. Now, we'd like to introduce your host, Jonathan Edelheit.
I want to thank everyone for joining us. I'm really excited for who we have with us today, Dr. Roizen from the Cleveland Clinic. And, I've worked with the Cleveland Clinic for a very long time, and they're, I feel, one of the best organizations from a healthcare standpoint for how they provide care for their patients. And Dr. Roizen's really in charge of what they're doing for their own people. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Roizen.
Well, let me just correct one thing. I used to be in charge of that. I'm emeritus now. And still have an advisory role, still see patients on Thursdays and Fridays. But my role is, for the rest of the time, is advisory and helping, if you will.
Got it. So, share with us how the Cleveland Clinic really takes care of their people. And I've just heard amazing things from you on your Healthy Choice program.
Well, this actually started with our CEO. So I have a strong feeling that this is a way to get it done, meaning to start both big and with CEO commitment. And Healthy Choice was, how do we keep our employees healthy, working, and viable longer? And at the same time, if we do that, our hypothesis was we should reduce their healthcare costs and our own. Now, I'm on a treadmill desk, so I'm going to stop so people don't get dizzy while I'm talking. But the goal is to have the healthiest workforce so they can bring all their energy to their life rather than have to spend it on treating their own chronic diseases. I started by, when the CEO, I was chair of anesthesia, critical care, pain management, and executive health at that time, an unusual combination, but I trained in both internal medicine and anesthesia because I wanted to run an ICU when I was a young kid. And I started when we found out that the most important thing for the health of patients undergoing surgery wasn't their heart function or their lung function or their brain function or their kidney function. It was their physiologic age. So that led to development of the concept of real age as opposed to calendar age. Why did we call it real age? Because we needed something that we could help motivate people and people understand age. So everyone wanted to be younger, if you will, from a standpoint of physiology. So when we decided to do a wellness institute, when Dr. Cosgrove decided to do a wellness institute at the clinic, it was one of the first foci was how do we help our own employees and use them as our, if you will, test. Because if we can't do it with our own employees, no reason to spread it to something that doesn't work to other people. So we started by doing things with 6 normals. How did we come to those 6 normals? Well, in the Chicago Public Employee Union databases, the gas company, electric company, and water company were public employees, public unions in public companies that had public unions in 1946. And after the war, most of the people there, 92+% of them, mostly men, volunteered to be in a study which looked at their medical variables and followed them till they died. And it turned out that after age 65, they lived 30% longer and had 70% less costs every year. Total net cost was 50% reduced by getting to what we call 6 normals: normal blood pressure, normal body mass index, wasn't obese, normal LDL cholesterol, etc. We modeled that. That was actually some processes and some outcomes. We modeled it totally for outcomes. The Cleveland Clinic has built itself based on outcome data. and that is how fast do patients return after surgery to a functioning status, what's their risk, etc. And they were very quantitative here. So we did that with this as well, going for what we call 6 normals plus 2. We actually trademarked that. So 6 normals and blood pressure, the ones I've gone into, in addition to cotinine, fasting blood sugar, and now a stress management program completed. At that time, it was asthma control. The plus 2 immunizations up to date, see a primary care practitioner to verify once a year to verify those findings and get them on a plan to get normal. So the goal was both to keep the healthy and, if you will, to help the people who weren't healthy to get healthy. What happened? Well, we've gone from 6% to about 44% of our employees have those 6 normals, and 6 normals plus 2, and 12% participating in a chronic disease management program to over 75%. Now, we did this with a large incentive. We did it with our primary care physicians actually involved, and we did it with the employees voluntarily participating. It's not a mandatory program at all. What has it meant? It saves us now. We have 110 or 11,000 employees now. For most of the time, we had about 101,000 employees in dependents. We saved in the last few years over 180 million we didn't spend that would have spent if we'd stayed at trend line or compared to the national averages. So that's what the clinic has saved on for not spent on its employees. No major change in benefit plan. What have the employees saved? They've saved the maximum allowed by law, which was 30% of their premiums, a little over 250 million in direct costs, about 50 million a year now, and probably equal to that or a multiple of that in copays, etc. So, and if you will, absentee days have gone down substantially. The human capital benefits have been substantial, meaning people are working with less chronic disease, and the savings for both the institution and for the individuals who voluntarily participate has been substantial. Jonathan, you're muted. Sorry.
Is going from 12 to 75%, like that's huge. That's unheard of. I know you mentioned incentives. What do you really attribute to having such a big dynamic change in that participation?
Well, I think a lot of it was CEO driven. He said, if we're a healthcare organization, we ought to be healthy and push the envelope on health and demonstrate that. Secondly, he promised, and there wasn't a huge amount of trust when he took over as CEO. It became substantially greater because he lived with his promises. And one of his promises was to give up to half of the savings, up to the limits of law, to the employees each year. And so that's what we have done. And he lived by that. And he, every month at our, we have a group session where everyone's invited once a month. He honored, and they're televised throughout the Cleveland Clinic system. He honored every month, he honored one person who had made major changes and gotten healthy, or one person who just was staying healthy. But we gave them a specific reward, if you will, of being shown to all their compatriots, as well as demonstrated that this was good for the health of the individuals. Now, we started out with smoking cessation. Smoking, probably the worst thing to start with. But if you will, he said, we took over, our main campus is 16 blocks by 5 blocks, but we have 11 campuses here in Northeast Ohio, 5 or 6 in Florida, 1 in Toronto, 2 in Las Vegas, I think 6 in Abu Dhabi, et cetera, and just opened today 1 in London, actually 2 in London now with and we have a bunch of family practices around the world, every one of them had the same rules. But in Cleveland, our main campus is 16 blocks by 5 blocks, and we took over the police enforcement there and said that anyone smoking within that area would be escorted outside that area. It was a non-smoke zone, and that any employee would the first offense, if you will, of an employee smoking in that area would be a trip to the tobacco treatment center, free trip. All the programs were made free to the employees. And the second one was the employee would be dismissed. Two, if you will, high-profile surgeons who refused to quit smoking in their offices were fired. And that example told everyone we were serious and that this wasn't a thing to get the lower-paid employees just involved or just to harangue them. That this meant this was for everyone, and there was no discrimination as far as gender, age, or socioeconomic status or volume of surgery they did. So I'm a strong believer in it was the CEO who set the tone. And yes, there were a number of us who continued to help. And it's really become a socialization issue now. The Skyway, we have a long Skyway that connects those 16 blocks by 5 blocks buildings. And whereas it was relatively empty before the start of 7 a.m. and after 3 p.m. beforehand, you now see a ton of people walking on it and doing physical activity in a relatively healthy way throughout the campus. We started out with 2, as I said, we have 11 hospitals here in Northeast Ohio. We started out with 2 fitness centers and we made them free. We now have over 9 fitness centers that are in Northeast Ohio that are free. And we collaborate a little bit if there's no fitness center nearby, giving them 50%, but ours are totally free and the majority of them now operate 24/7.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. With the incentives, was that a one-time thing over the course of a year, or that continued for several years, or it's in place still?
It is continual. In other words, they get if we, as long as we're saving more than 30% of the premiums, if you will, they're getting all of that back.
That's
and so it's around $1,500 or $1,600 a family now. So it is, and it continually. We gave $100 initially in checks. It was a waste of the $100 because we wasted $4 million on the 40,000 or whoever participated in it, because the healthy just accepted it, and if you will, so it was just a total waste of money because we didn't change any behavior. It wasn't until you get to a much higher level that the incentive actually makes a difference in changing behavior. In fact, Rand in their book has a footnote, and I used to know the page number, but it says incentives don't work unless they're large, and that's exactly right. Incentives didn't work until they got large.
So based upon what you have experienced, there's this whole philosophy around the carrot or the stick. Which would you choose?
Well, we do both essentially. So the stick is for those things that we feel you can put your feet in cement on. So we don't have any sugared beverages, any free sugar. We took it out of the salad dressings. We took it out of the ketchup, etc. Hard to get. And we have only whole wheat buns, etc. Hard to do because those are expensive or more expensive than the standard, but we did that. The soft drink company that gave us $600,000 a year in educational kickbacks from the vending machines called the day we took the sugar beverages out, or planned to, and said, "You're going to lose the $600,000." And Toby said, her as the CEO of the company, so you can guess which company it was. It'll be the best $600,000 we don't get. And in fact, within 3 months, sales, which included water and diets, sodas, were back to normal at that time. So, and the incentive continued with a rival company. The process was, and we, if you will, got rid of McDonald's on campus as soon as their contract ended, et cetera. So there are some sticks, but they're mainly carrots. So I think a combination of the two, but really it was leadership and being continual, honest, and trustworthy. So Toby was CEO for 15 years, and continuing that with me in that same role was, I think, a major thing that helped people know he was, and we were going to honor that, and it's still honored now.
Oh, I feel like that's such a great case model for other companies. Sometimes I even talk about how, people running benefits or wellness programs at companies should get incentives, just like sales and business development people do. If they do innovative things that save money, that have an impact, because they're really not recognized, but I feel you've taken it to a whole nother level on the incentives and totally transforming, the culture and, how everyone acts and lives, which I think majority of all the companies out there don't realize this is something, that they can do. But of course, it requires huge leadership, a long-term vision of leadership.
Yeah, let me tell you a couple stories out of tales that I probably shouldn't tell. But essentially, more than 50% of our operating income in some lean years, 2017 and 18, was the amount we didn't spend on healthcare that wasn't needed. That is, if people didn't need healthcare, we didn't spend the money for them to get things they didn't need. And consequently, those were savings of 180 and 190 million, which is more than 50% of our operating margin, able to be plowed back into other services for patients and minority communities, et cetera, in Cleveland. So those were important lessons from the CEO standpoint. The other thing is there's always a constant battle between the CEO and the CFO. There's a constant, do we really want to do the incentives? Are you going to lose money on doing it? What about this program? Well, just to let you know, within 3 years, just the change in absentee rate of nurses, saying physicians and administrative staff were useless, but just not replacing the nurses who were key for delivering services who were not absent would have paid for the entire program. So at least in our models, this was a very good program. But literally the first 3 years, the CFO, I believe, I was told by board members, tried to get me fired every quarter and tried to get Toby to stop the program every quarter because it was an expense for the first 3 years until we were able to get enough data to show how much we were not spending on services that the typical hospital or our rivals were spending. So, but for an HR executive, you need the confidence. And although I wasn't one, I mean, that's the role I was playing. For someone involved in wellness programming, you need the confidence of the CEO because the CFO is going to try constantly to get you terminated early on in the program.
So no, I mean, that's got to be, it's got to be stressful, is, knowing, you're pushing forward because you have a belief, but knowing there's someone following behind you in that kind of a senior position doing it. But it's great that you were able to show those results.
Yeah, no. And in fact, a couple board members were friends of mine, and they would say, well, blank tried to get you fired again this quarter, and Toby stood up for you. So it was like, it was like I had to pray Toby stayed in existence stayed healthy enough to be there until we could show the results we did.
Yeah, you got to be bold and brave and go after what you believe in. So I definitely respect you for that. What now? Everyone's always talking about, oh, we need outcomes, we need processes, we need to like look at how are we going to achieve these outcomes or get to these outcomes. What advice would you have on like, aiming, for outcomes or the road to get to those outcomes?
It turned out that the outcomes were the key, and we had over 100 programs that we made free, that were the cost of our doing this program, if you will, to get us there. Everything from, we have, believe it or not, we had something like 70 different weight loss programs, including Weight Watchers, including a whole bunch of programs. As I said, we had the fitness centers. We had 3 smoking cessation programs initially. We developed our own stress management program. So we developed a whole bunch of programs, but we changed the food offerings. Obviously, we went through 3 different major food suppliers, if you will, until one of them could get it correct. And as I told you, we went through 2 soft drink suppliers, if you will, till one agreed to not have. The only place that was an exception was we have one blind distribution center, and that's the only place we allowed sugared food to be, if you will. It's a small one person operation, but we didn't have the heart to stop that. But there was a bookstore on campus that every other week we had to take food off their shelves, and essentially we confiscated. After a while, because they would do it, we just confiscated it until they realized they were going to lose more money by the confiscation, and we had to rewrite all our contracts, if you will. So yes, but the CEO was willing to do that. We replaced, if you will, the McDonald's with an art gallery initially, and now with a vegan restaurant. So it took some doing, but it is a continual process. But outcomes were measured. So we measured, and this was interesting. Our two machines didn't talk to one another. Our medical records didn't talk to our HR. And so we would send out a form to the primary care physician. The patient, the employee, and the dependent would take it to their primary care physician, where we had to get these 6+2 variables written down once a year and then faxed in. It ended up being a very good thing. Because what happened is it ended up being a discussion point between the primary care physician and the employees, each of those, the blood pressure, the LDL cholesterol, now apolipoprotein B, etc. And by doing that, you force the discussion, and the primary care physicians loved it. Meaning we worried that they were going to say, this is an extra burden, throw that piece of paper away. But no, it actually was the first time they felt that the employees, the people, every one of them was paying attention to the recommendations to get their blood pressure under control or to take their medication for it, etc. So it ended up, we helped win over the primary care physicians for the whole practice that way.
Is there anything that you learned, like, don't do this, don't go down this route?
Well, we called the smoking cessation program initially Smash the Ash, and every cigarette smoker thought we were smashing them. So we learned that there were some words that the way you phrase things is important, and to use a test group before you go out. We learned that pregnant ladies who are pregnant in their 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th month don't like to be called obese, so that you've got to do more than a BMI initiation in females of childbearing age, if you will. And so we learned a lot of what I would call the practical and individual things in implementing it. But it didn't change the whole practice that we focus on those outcomes. Those 6 normals plus 2 is still what changes. If you look at all health, that's what really matters, In the nurses' health study now, it's a 90% in the older nurses, 84% reduction in chronic disease if they get there. In the Swedish men's study, it's an 87% reduction. In our own practice, it's clearly more than an 80% reduction in chronic disease of those who get to the 6 normals plus 2. So it's a major difference, and a major difference in absentee days.
Why isn't everybody doing this?
I don't know, other than I can give an example. So we presented to another major healthcare system to do it, if you will, and we were going to help them implement it. Yeah, there was going to be a small consultant charge, but nothing that was going to even rival close to. We presented to the head of HR. Now, this is after the CEO said to the head of HR, I want to do this. And the head of HR, after we spent probably 2 weeks of time with him, said, why would I do this now? It's going to make me look like I'm stupid to have not done it 7 years ago. And he didn't do it. And so he ended up getting fired 3 years later, but he resisted doing it because of that inertia or that feeling that he was going to look stupid for not having done it sooner. I don't understand every self-employed company not doing this. It's voluntary. It's a huge savings for health. And right now we're short of human capital. It's a huge human capital savings. Our sick days went down by a third when this got started. People got healthier and stayed healthier, and can work longer and be healthy in doing it and thrive doing it. So it is I am baffled. And part of the reason, I'm sure, is there is an initial cost. And so I'm sure that inertia, the initial cost, scares people. And we're quarter to quarter in this company, not 5 years looking at it at a time. So I'm actually really surprised Warren Buffett and his company haven't done it, since he's a longer term and he's been here and examined it. So I don't quite know why a lot more people aren't doing it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's avoiding risk or just a feeling of, can we really change things if we do it? But with what you're sharing, it's a no-brainer. At the same time, it's very clear. It's almost like in the DNA of Cleveland Clinic, meaning, right? It's like,
it is now, but it never was.
Yeah.
Can I do a screen share with you and just show you some of the data that I've said, just to show you the data?
Yeah, sure. Give me one.
I don't know if I have potential, but let's see if I do. I apparently do. So let me go up and just show you. I know you didn't prepare for me to show you the data, but I can't resist.
I can't. I'm waiting in anticipation. This is going to be great.
So let me just show you. So it started with, I'll show you. Let me go back a little bit on the slides. So we now have an app that helps us, but I'm not going to go through that, if you will, that helps people stay young. Well, let me go to this. So what the name really of that? What really matters to chronic disease is if you change behavior, it reduces the risk of chronic disease to 10 to 20%. We control a huge amount of which of our genes are on or not through our epigenes. That's another story. And I went through, this is the nurses' health study. It was 90% in the older nurses, 84%, but only 4% of the people who should know best did those behaviors. If you look at the men's study, and by the way, one of them is blood pressure. How important is getting blood pressure under control? Well, this is the VA study where we had lousy drugs, reserpine and hydrochlorothiazide only. But you see, over a 5-year period with these men who started at age 53, it's a 36 to 6% over 5-year reduction in a terminating event. Huge benefit from managing blood pressure, but that's true of all of these things. Swedish men, it was only 4% of the nurses, but only 1% of the men. Why are we so expensive in the U.S.? Because above the age of 18, only 2.7% of us do that, And by the time we get to Medicare age, it's 0.6%, less than 1%. And so, if you will, it's blood pressure, it's body mass index, fasting blood sugar, LDL, tobacco end products in the urine, and stress management program completed, and then see a primary care provider and immunizations up to date. And as I said, we've gone considerably up in our number of people who have got the 6 normals. And if you will, let me just show you, I'm hoping I'm showing you the data. Yeah. So this is what we started to save. You see, it's 160 million. I mean, it gradually, you notice I don't show 2008 and 9. Those are the first 2 years we actually lost money on it. But it's pretty substantial savings or not spending compared to our trend line. And that's, if you will, the gist of it. It is getting to those endpoints.
Let me ask you a quick question.
I'm sorry that I did the slide share other than.
It was great. I think it was great. Is how much did you lose each year in the first couple of years?
It cost us cost us 4 million, cost us 11 million in the first 2 years, 7 million and 4 million.
So 7 million versus close to $1 billion in savings over the years.
Well, right now, I mean, it's saved us the estimate is about 1.4 billion directly, and then the employees have saved probably 300 million direct, and probably another 300 or 400 million in copays, et cetera.
I mean, no one can share those kinds of numbers. That's what everybody would dream to accomplish in this space. If companies said, oh, we need to go and lean in this model, how do they? I'm just curious. Have you published a book on this? Like where do they start outside of the?
We've published some papers, and the clinic started doing this as a consulting arrangement. Now, since we didn't really, though, the only way to make money on this is if you do share the savings. So the clinic has stopped doing it until we can figure out how to share the savings. But essentially, anyone can do this. This isn't rocket science. Now, we have developed an app that we share with that people that'll be probably by the end of July will be commercially available. It isn't quite yet. And this we did in a private company called the Great Age Reboot. People can go to greatagereboot.com and sign up for information. So greatagereboot.com or info@greatagereboot.com. But I started to show you that. I didn't mean to do that. But anyway, it's a Reboot Your Age app, which helps you to stay younger. But first thing it does is it gets you towards six normals plus 2. And then, it goes off for all the other things you can do.
So that I'm definitely going to download that app. You
can't yet. It's the Reboot Your Age app, but by the end of July you'll be able to.
Okay, soon enough, which is great. Because I want to live as long as I possibly can, especially now that I've got a son. Really you want to be there for him, and much more focused on, okay, I'm doing well, but how do I do even better in reducing all these issues that I know is going to affect my longevity. So talking about human longevity is, where do you see that going? Because I know with COVID, they're talking about we lost 4 years of our longevity.
Yeah, I'm going to do a little screen share again.
Okay.
So I don't know if I've got the COVID data here, but I hopefully do to show you. So let's see if I can find this. Yeah, I do. So I don't know if you can see this.
Yes.
This is during the pandemic of 17-19. And if you will, the life expectancy went down by 12 years in that year. And it bounced back fast. We obviously have 2 pandemics, both opioids and COVID-19. And if you will, the decrease in life expectancy is nonsense, because what they've said is cohort life expectancy. What that means is they expect everyone to die of the same things they did in 2020 and 21. Well, hopefully we won't be dying of COVID at the same rate as we died in those 2 years. So that data, that's because we use cohort instead of what you might call if you will, the real life expectancy. So you don't want to use period life expectancy. You want to use cohort life expectancy, like what will happen to your cohort as you go forward. And we don't think that's going to decrease. In fact, what has happened since 1890 is we've extended life expectancy by 2.5 years every 10 years. Women are in blue here. They always live about 3 years longer than men on average, but we've extended it by 2.5 years every 10 years through 2020. We don't have data in the world since then, but it's continued. It's continued on our coast. It just hasn't continued in the middle of the country since then. The interesting thing is what we expect in the next decade is a 30-year increase. And I love doing that. That is medicine and the science in aging mechanisms. I'm going to do that again because I love doing it. The science of aging mechanisms is now at an exponential growth rate. There are 14 areas of research into aging mechanisms. That's why we did the Reboot Your Age app at greatagereboot.com. Why we did it was because there's a lot of junk on the internet about aging and longevity, but there's some real data. And so this app helps curate this real data to know what is real and what isn't. And essentially it says it started with the data on you get to control your genetics through your epigenes and how much of a difference that makes. That's a full another hour, but basically we think when you look at the data, we hit our peak quality of life between 25 and 35 and lose about 5% of function every decade thereafter. And that's what will happen if you don't do anything about it. My favorite study of all was this of Harvard physicians looking at their IQ starting in 1952. This is physicians at Mass General and the Brigham and Beth Israel. And you see there was a 5% decline in IQ on average. But a group didn't lose any IQ points as they aged. In fact, 25% did. And so you say, how do you become one of those 25%? And there actually are 33 things you can do to change your rate of aging to keep your brain young that have been shown in at least 2 studies in humans. Everything from physical activity to speed of processing games, et cetera, and a bunch of supplements and food. And that's shown in the studies of the Chicago cohorts who've done the MIND diet. And by that alone, independent of their genome, they've reduced their risk by 60%. What we know is that you can create fewer errors, for example, small amounts of sugar, less big meals, et cetera. And that's what we call rejuvenation, slowing your rate of aging. But there's something else, if you will, and it really started with the Human Genome Project. We expected to find 300,000 genes. There only were around 22,500 found by both Ventnor's group and the NIH group, Collins's group. And what was the rest of the DNA called? It was called junk DNA. But it really wasn't. It was junk DNA turned out to be epigenes that controlled your genes. And the great news is you get to control those switches to a large degree. One example, when you do physical activity, you turn on a gene in your muscles that creates a small protein, irisin, that gets across the blood-brain barrier and releases brain-derived neurotrophic growth factor, increases its production so that your brain enlarges, your hippocampus enlarges. And that's key for your memory center. So one example is you are a genetic engineer. And when we learn how to capture this for rebooting to a younger age, that's where we're going to, in fact, make major changes. They're doing that in with 14 different processes in animal models now. They're moving into humans. So I think with at least an 80% probability, we're going to extend lifespan 30 years and human capital 30 years. It's not expending the old. it's making the period from, if you will, that's now 20 to 90, like the period that's 20 to 60 currently. So you're going to extend your productive years and have many more functioning younger people, even at an old age.
And it's not too late for anyone to start this, no matter what your age. Like if you're not doing it,
as long as you're not in the 6 feet under yet, it's not too late.
And then if people are looking at, well, I've already damaged my cells, I'm not going to be able to repair them, I'm not able to get new ones. The answer to that is that's not true. You can.
You still have in your genome what you started with, and maybe we'll be able to reboot it back. There's no guarantees right now. So you want to stay as healthy as possible. Maybe by 2050, you go in one end of the car wash as a 90-year-old and you come out as a 40-year-old. But that isn't what's happening yet. It's organ by organ now, currently. But we think it's going to be, you're going to be able to reboot to a much younger age.
That's very exciting. We need that kind of optimism and something to shoot for.
Well, just imagine how it changes. If everyone works 20 years longer, instead of working 25, 40 years, it increases the GDP by 50%. It does away with the problem of Social Security running out of money or the trust funds running out of money. And it is an enormous tax collection system. And it can do away, if we do it like Australia, Singapore, and Denmark have done it, with forced 3% savings, even of a $15 per hour income, it means that by age 95, you'd have $2.8 million at that little 3% contribution instead of $215,000. But if we force it like those three countries do, you end up doing away with a lot of, if you will, wealth inequality by the process. So if we do it right, this is a great chance for us to change the quality of life of everybody.
That's great. That's exciting. It's very exciting. I feel like you're just on the cusp, the cutting edge of everything. It's, the employee wellness, living a longer life. Any, as we kind of wrap things up, any personal words of wisdom to anyone, whether it's in the corporate setting or the personal setting?
I'm going to go now to the one more slide. I'll give you the conclusion of this talk, if you will, because it's, if I can do slide share again, because it's such a good screen share again, because this is my real feeling of conclusion. And I apologize, so I'm going to skip way to the end, I hope. Let's see. Yeah, so these are my messages, if you will. So you are a genetic engineer for you. Only eat food you love and that loves you back. Food's a relationship like a marriage. You wouldn't marry someone who's trying to kill you every day. You shouldn't eat food that's trying to kill you. You may love French fries and cheeseburgers, but they're trying to kill you. You want to eat, if you will, salmon burgers that taste just as good, or avocado, things you love that will love you back, or walnuts. You've got to have a team. None of this can be done by any of us individually. You want to add speed both to your muscle workout and to your brain workout, as that's what appears to be an important thing in preparing you for the reboot. And manage stress, including cultivating your friends and purpose. Your posse and purpose will matter an incredible amount as we go forward. And so those are my take-home messages, if you will, for each person.
Well, thank you very much and sharing all that wisdom and insights. We really appreciate it.
My privilege. Thank you, Jonathan.